Did you know that long-term PPI use for acid reflux can actually increase the chances for infections, the chances for osteoporosis and bone fracture, nutritional deficiencies, and it may even increase the risk for certain cancers? In the next few minutes, I'll explain to you why, first of all, it can be so shocking to hear this information when I share it with people and clients. I'll help you understand the true risks of some of these common medications. And I'll explain how you can actually focus on the root causes to reduce your dependency on these potentially harmful medications. I'm Dylan, and over the past 4 years, I've helped hundreds of people reverse chronic health issues, get off meds, so on and so forth. And acid reflux is absolutely one of those things. And when people come to me for help, one of the first things I have to do is really fill in some of their knowledge gaps, especially around medication. You see, when people come in, they're often on a ton of over-the-counter prescription or medications. They're on prescriptions. Maybe they're on a whole bill of supplements. And we have to have that conversation of like, well, what are you actually getting for all those things? Usually, they're getting partial results and slowly deteriorating health, or both. And we have to start to ask, why is this happening? And they tend to chalk it up to aging, bad genes, or just bad luck. But I think there's a much bigger factor at play, and that factor is that the medical establishment, that's doctors and pharmaceutical companies, they're not actually healthcare. They're much more like sick care. That is, they focus on masking symptoms rather than actually resolving the root causes of health issues. And I'll talk more about that in a future video. If you guys are interested, you can say in the comments below. But essentially, it's not profitable to get you healthy. It's only profitable when you're sick. I'm not saying that there's necessarily ill intent there, but it can often feel to us like the goal is to get us on a prescription subscription rather than help us truly resolve the health issues. Because if we get healthy, then we don't need any of the medications or surgeries or anything like that. So if this is the first time you're hearing this information, that's probably why. There's a big bias in the medical establishment towards presenting drugs and surgeries as the only option, and they have plenty of incentive to do that in a way that doesn't give you reason to object, or you'll give them resistance and consume less product and services. So that's probably why you haven't heard this information before. With that said, now let me teach you about some of the risks of acid reflux medications. And as I teach it, please note that all my citations and the resources used in the creation of this video are available in the description below. And so the common reflux medications are basically in 4 different groups. First of all, antacids. Those are things that basically just chemical buffers to the acid in the stomach. H2 blockers and PPIs, those suppress the production of acid in the stomach. And then prokinetics, and those speed up the flow of food throughout the digestive system. Now, I'm not going to talk much about prokinetics today because they're kind of a different class of medication, but you can always learn more about that in my complete guide for reflux, which is located if you click the link in the description. Now, antacids, H2 blockers, PPIs, all those work pretty similarly by suppressing acid in some way, and thus share a lot of the same long-term effects. While they're generally good and safe to use short-term, 8 to 12 weeks, roughly speaking, periodically to relieve symptoms in the short term, long-term acid suppression causes a lot of imbalances in the body, and there's basically 4 big ones. Number 1, it stops it from killing bacteria. And basically, stomach acid is very acidic, and that does 2 things. It helps you break down food better, and it actually kills a lot of the bad bacteria that aren't supposed to be there. So anytime that we lower the acidity of the stomach, whether through buffering, like the antacids like Tums or Pepto-Bismol, or by suppressing acid release in the case of H2 blockers and PPIs, you interfere with this natural protection and natural defense. So more of the bacteria survive, and we can get more infections that way. And research backs this up with mounting evidence linking long-term PPI use to increased chance of C. diff infection. Number 2, bacterial imbalance. Basically, similar to the previous one, because that natural acidic barrier against bacteria is weakened, more bacteria survive the stomach and end up colonizing the intestines and intestinal tract. That leads to bacterial imbalance there, or otherwise known as dysbiosis. And so there's been research linking PPI use to things such as bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, also known as SIBO, and even dysbiosis in the large intestine associated with IBS. Basically, disturbing that acid in the stomach can set a lot of things out of whack with the digestive system as a whole. Number 3 is nutrient absorption. Just like it doesn't lower acidity, doesn't kill as many bacteria, it also doesn't break down food as well. And so that can affect how we actually absorb nutrients. Many nutrients require a strong acidic environment to be broken down. And so there's concerns that have been raised about iron, vitamin C, folic acid, B12, magnesium, calcium. And while the research is still a bit controversial and up in the air, they do kind of notice these trends more in older populations. And it's also this nutrient absorption issue that has been theorized to explain the higher rates of bone fracture with long-term PPI use. And at one point, the FDA placed a label on over-the-counter PPIs to warn about this potential risk, but then took it off a year later in recognition of the feeling that the risk to bone health is mostly only in cases where there's higher doses and uses for longer than a year. You can do what you will with that information. And number 4 is dependency and rebound effects. And this refers to the potential for increased symptoms after drug treatment stops due to the stomach hyper-secreting acid. Basically, if you're after some time of using H2 blockers or PPIs, the stomach adapts to compensate for those drugs. So when you remove them from your system, the stomach then overproduces the acid, leading to worse symptoms. It's easy to see how that can create kind of a negative feedback loop where, you need more medication to stay out of your stomach's adaptation to being on the medication. And so, those are kind of the big 4 ways it kind of naturally disrupts things. But also long-term PPI use has been linked to increased risk of cancer. A meta-analysis of 65 studies across 10 different cancer types and spanning 6.8 million people showed an association of long-term PPI use with gastric cancer, pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer, liver cancer, but interestingly, it was not associated with esophageal cancer. It's important to note, though, that a causal connection has not yet been proven. So basically, in short-term use, periodic use for relief of symptoms temporarily, it's fine, but they do have these long-term costs and risks. While it's really important to manage issues in the short term, these meds don't really focus on any of the root causes of acid reflux. And so, if we rely on those, first of all, we can become dependent, just like we discussed, but also we'll always be dancing around the problem if we're just relying on the medications because they're not solving the root cause. And so we'll be stuck managing heartburn and regurgitation, and we'll never actually get true resolution of these issues. And so if that's what you're looking for, we need to know about the root causes and how to solve them. So let's talk about that. When we have acid reflux, keep in mind the problem isn't the acid. That's a natural process in the body. It's supposed to be acidic to break down food and kill bacteria, like we just said. What's really happening is that lower esophageal sphincter, that's the valve that seals off the stomach from the lower esophagus and contains all the acid in the stomach, is basically malfunctioning. That's ultimately the widely accepted root cause of acid reflux, is that sphincter is just not really closing well. So what causes the LES to weaken over time? Well, I break it into 2 main groups of things that weaken the LES. First of all is pressure builders, and second of all is sphincter disruptors. Now, pressure builders are anything that increases the intragastric pressure in the stomach or abdomen. So anything that increases pressure is going to be something that makes the LES have to strain harder to contain the contents of the stomach. And so some common ones are weight, constipation, bloating, stress, smoking, eating big meals, carbonated drinks, pregnancy. If you think about it, all those things have the potential to build that pressure. For instance, constipation, if you have, a stop up, that's going to build pressure upwards on the rest of your digestive system. Bloating is pretty straightforward. With all that gas in there, it's going to increase the pressure. Carbonated drinks are very similar to that. Pregnancy, pretty self-explanatory too. Weight, if you have excess weight that you're carrying, especially around the abdomen, that downwards gravitational pressure is going to influence and strain the LES, weaken it over time. And so that kind of makes sense. The other group is sphincter disruptors, and that's really anything that directly inhibits the operation of that sphincter closing appropriately. Some common ones include many foods, certain foods, smoking, certain medications, there's a long list there, the gut-brain axis, and structural issues. So when we talk about foods, we're thinking of things like definitely alcohol, definitely fatty foods. You can imagine kind of greasy, fatty stuff being more slippery or hard to grab on. At least that's how I envision it. And it makes it harder for the LES to close. Caffeine has been implicated. Other common food triggers, like spicy food, for instance, they think that those might trigger acid reflux by relaxing the LES, although it seems pretty unclear exactly how they work. Smoking's a big one. Smokers definitely have lower, pressure of that LES closing than non-smokers. Medications, we don't have time to really go through all of those here, but there's a ton of medications that kind of inhibit that. The gut-brain axis, that's how your emotional well-being in your mind affects your gut, and vice versa, how your gut health affects your emotional and mental well-being. And so if you are going through some of those things, it can actually affect the function of that, and you would see more instance or bouts of acid reflux. And then structural issues, especially like hiatal hernia is a really good example. That's going to affect how well that sphincter is able to close. Now, knowing that those drivers is really powerful because now you kind of know where to focus your efforts to deal with reflux through lifestyle. Diving into the food, supplements, enzymes, and so forth is really kind of beyond the scope of this video. But if you want to learn more about addressing the root causes to acid reflux, either check out more of the videos on this channel or go to the link in the description to download the Ultimate Guide for Acid Reflux. That goes into more detail on a plan and a structure to really address those root causes. Hope this was helpful. If you liked it or if it found it somewhat valuable, make sure to like, subscribe. That way YouTube is going to know to promote it to more people that need to hear it. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.